Hi, welcome to Prime Recap. Pinocchio is taken away by a circus, and to get back to his father, he will have to deal with various dangers such as a colossal man-eating whale. Today we will recap the story of the 2020 movie, Pinocchio. In a town in the Italian countryside, an extremely poor carpenter named Geppetto spends his days trying to convince people to hire his service in order to have something to eat. But since everyone around him is also poor and has no money to pay him, he practically lives off the charity of his neighbors. Then, on another ordinary day, Geppetto sees some wooden dolls on a circus wagon and decides that he will make one just like it so that he can travel around the world making money from his work. With this in mind, he goes to the wood supplier to ask for some material for his project, but it turns out that he went at the right time. Just before Geppetto shows up, the gentleman was cutting some wood when suddenly one of the logs starts shaking and walking towards him, causing the man to become quite frightened. So when Geppetto shows up asking for the wood, the vendor immediately hands over the bizarrely shaped log to him. With the wood in hand, Geppetto goes home and begins to make his puppet, but when he is molding the thorax he realizes that the heart of the sculpture is beating. And instead of being scared like a normal human being, Geppetto is extremely happy and motivated that his work has a life of its own. After a few more weeks of work, Geppetto finally finishes carving the puppet and gives it the name Pinocchio, the wooden boy. And now with his masterpiece finished, Geppetto cuts up his own blanket to sew the boy's clothes and begins to teach him to walk. But Pinocchio doesn't behave and takes advantage of Geppetto's distraction to run away, running from his own father through the town. But he gets the attention of some dogs that start chasing him, as if they were running after a stick with legs. And in order not to be eaten by the dogs, Pinocchio runs back home and locks the door. But as soon as he does so, an extremely bizarre talking cricket emerges from the ceiling and starts giving him a moral lesson, saying that badly raised children always get into trouble. But instead of listening to the cricket, Pinocchio gets angry and throws one of Geppetto's tools at him, hitting the creature on the head. Pinocchio then sits down in front of the fireplace and begins to sleep, but a short time later he is woken up by Geppetto, who starts banging on the door asking him to unlock it. However, when he tries to get up to do so, he realizes that he no longer has his legs, for as the ingenious puppet had his legs practically stuck inside the fireplace all this time, they were incinerated by the fire. With the boy unable to walk to open the door, Geppetto jumps out the window and helps him up, but starts to fight with him right away, saying that he would not carve other legs as a form of punishment for having run away. But after some time Geppetto calms down and finally carves new legs for the boy. The next morning, Geppetto goes to the town merchant to buy a notebook for Pinocchio, but since he has no money to pay for it, the poor carpenter gives away practically all of his body clothes to buy the material for his son to study. With the notebook, Geppetto takes Pinocchio to school extremely happy and proud, but on the way Pinocchio sees something that catches his attention the most: a puppet circus. Curious to find out how a circus works and wanting to meet the other wooden puppets that were his brothers, Pinocchio pretends to enter the school and runs to the circus as soon as Geppetto turns his back, but is barred by the theater security guard because he doesn't have the money to pay the 4 silver coins for the ticket. Wanting to see the show, Pinocchio goes to the same merchant where Geppetto bought the notebook and asks him for the 4 coins, but when the man refuses to give him the money, the boy decides to sell the notebook to buy the ticket, so he can finally see the show. But during the performance, one of the puppets from the show sees Pinocchio and, realizing that he is also a wooden puppet, calls him to the stage so they can hug each other. But all this movement of the puppets has caught the attention of the circus owner, who is impressed by the fact that Pinocchio doesn't have the puppet strings and so decides to take him to the back while the others continue the show. In the late afternoon, Geppetto goes to the school to fetch Pinocchio, but is met by the security guard, who is already closing the place and says that all the classrooms are empty, advising him to look for the puppet circus, since children usually pass by there. But as soon as he arrives at the indicated place, Geppetto realizes that the circus is no longer there. That's right, that thief took Pinocchio. On the outskirts of a nearby town, the circus owner is running low on wood for his fire, and decides he will use Pinocchio for the flames, but gives up and decides to spare him when he sees that the boy goes into complete despair, wanting to return to his father. Moved by the story and the simplicity of Pinocchio and Geppetto, the next morning the circus owner gives the boy 5 gold coins and sets him free to return to his father. With that, Pinocchio says goodbye to the other dolls and starts walking back to his town, but along the way he ends up talking out loud about the coins he has earned, attracting the attention of a lame fox and a blind cat, 2 extremely bizarre subjects. When they hear about the coins, the 2 crooks immediately run towards Pinocchio and start trying to trick him by telling him that they know of a field of miracles that multiplies everything that is planted, so all the boy has to do is plant the 5 coins there and they will magically multiply. But to trick the boy, The fox invents that the camp only works at dawn and convinces him to spend the night in a nearby boarding house where they devour everything like real animals and even take the opportunity to further fool Pinocchio, who ends up falling asleep. In the middle of the night, the owner of the boarding house wakes Pinocchio up saying that the cat and the fox have gone away and left a bill for a gold coin for him to pay. But even with this clear sign that something is wrong, he decides to pay and go to the field alone in the middle of the night. Along the way, the talking cricket appears among the trees and starts to warn Pinocchio, saying that he should turn around and give the 4 remaining coins to his father because the path he is following is dangerous. However, once again the stubborn boy ignores the talking cricket's warnings and continues onto the field, not realizing that he is walking right into a trap. After a few more minutes of walking, Pinocchio finally arrives at the supposed Field of Miracles where he comes face to face with 2 hooded men who try to take his coins, and in fear, the boy swallows the gold and starts running through the forest until he finds a house in the middle of nowhere. Terrified, Pinocchio begins to knock on the door asking for help, but the only one who answers is the ghost of a girl who appears in the second-story window saying that there is no one alive in the house to help him. At that moment, the fox and the hooded cat finally find Pinocchio and try to steal the coins, but when they realize that he has swallowed them, the bandits decide to knock him to take the coin by force. With this goal in mind, they tie a rope around Pinocchio's neck and hang him from a tree thinking that soon he will lose his life, but enough time passes and nothing happens. After several hours of waiting, the fox and the cat fall asleep and don't even notice when a humanoid creature appears and starts to untie them. With Pinocchio free, this creature puts him in a cart and takes him back to that haunted house where an extremely macabre slug woman and that girl who is actually a fairy begin to take care of him. After a few days in bed, Pinocchio starts to feel better and the fairy decides to ask him about what happened until he gets there. But ashamed to tell the wrong things he did, Pinocchio distorts the story by blatantly lying, making his nose bigger than a baseball bat and forcing the fairy to summon a group of woodpeckers to remove the excess wood. After that, the girl and Pinocchio spend several days having fun, but knowing that he still needs to return to his father. As soon as the boy is fully recovered, the fairy takes him to the nearest town and says goodbye. But while walking through town, Pinocchio is spotted by the fox and the cat who call him to talk. The bandit duo says that they have been looking for him all this time and that they didn't know anything about the hooded guys, and even with all this nonsense, Pinocchio is innocent and ends up being hoodwinked again. Being tricked for the second time, Pinocchio follows the fox and the cat to the Field of Miracles where he buries the 4 gold coins that were left over, and to finish the trick, the fox says that the money needs to be watered to multiply and sends Pinocchio to fetch water from a nearby pond. But when he returns and finds that his coins are no longer there, he finally realizes that he has been tricked all this time. Outraged, Pinocchio goes to the town palace to report the theft, but when he hears the story, the judge condemns him as innocent and has him arrested. Yes, for some bizarre reason in this town all the innocent people are arrested. While being dragged along by the guards, Pinocchio finally realizes this and starts to tell all the bad things he has ever done and thus manages to convince the judge to release him. Finally free, Pinocchio makes his way back to his home, but when he finally returns to his home he realizes that the door is locked and that his father is no longer living there. According to a neighbor, after Pinocchio disappeared, Geppetto went into a deep sadness and after waiting so long for his son to return, he decided to go out and look for him on his own towards the sea. Knowing this, Pinocchio runs to shore and begins to swim in the middle of the ocean, but ends up fainting from exhaustion and ends up in the middle of a deserted beach where he is rescued by that fairy who is now an adult. Once he realizes how old she has gotten, Pinocchio asks the fairy to turn him into a real boy so he can grow up too. However, knowing that he is misbehaving, she says that first Pinocchio will have to show that he is a good person, starting with his responsibility to his studies. So when he makes a full recovery, Pinocchio finally starts going to school and attending classes, but soon he makes friends with another bratty boy named Wink, and together they start causing mayhem wherever they go, putting a frog in the teacher's pants, skipping classes, and stealing food from people's houses. After spending hours like this, when night falls, Pinocchio tries to return to the fairy's house, but upset that he has misbehaved once again, the slug refuses to let him in and forces him to spend the night outside. When dawn breaks, the slug goes to Pinocchio, who is sleeping leaning against the door, and says that the fairy would forgive him for the last time, but that he must behave himself from now on. Afraid of losing his chance to become a real boy, Pinocchio takes the notebook with the slug and goes to school where he realizes that Wink has missed school. But even though he is worried about his friend, he attends class normally and goes home soon after to continue studying with the help of the fairy. After some time studying hard, the day of the final exam draws near and Pinocchio manages to get a 10 on the test, and when he hears about it, The extremely proud fairy says that the next day she will throw a party and turn him into a real boy. Happy with the news, Pinocchio hugs the fairy and runs outside to invite his classmates to the celebration. But halfway there, he sees Wink hiding from his mother and decides to go to him to ask what happened and tell him the news. But Wink says that he won't be able to go to the party because he wants to run away to Toyland, a magical place where children are free to do whatever they want. In the middle of the night, Pinocchio meets Wink on the road outside of town to keep him company while his friend waits for the wagon that will take him to the land of toys. But while they wait, Wink keeps trying to convince Pinocchio to give up everything and go with him to this new place, but Pinocchio denies, saying that he only came to say goodbye. But the wooden boy's determination ends when the wagon arrives and Wink starts calling him to climb on it, along with dozens of other boys who are also in the wagon. In the end, Pinocchio gives in and decides to abandon his dream of becoming a real boy to go to Toyland, where he makes several friends with whom he spends the whole day playing and having fun. But the next morning, Pinocchio wakes up feeling something strange in his head and goes straight to Wink's room, where they discover that his ears have been turned into donkey ears. And as if this were not bad enough, the pair of friends begin to transform until they finally become two donkeys. That man with the wagon is actually a kind of sorcerer who deceives miners to turn them into donkeys and sell them. When the prospective buyers arrive, Mastiff, who is the owner of a circus of horrors, ends up buying Pinocchio, separating him from his friend Wink. Thinking of using him in shows, Mastiff begins training Pinocchio the donkey, teaching him various tricks until he is finally ready to perform. In one of these shows, Pinocchio ends up tripping over the circle of fire and falls on his own paw, needing to be carried by the staff, while the fairy watches sadly in the middle of the crowd who are falling in laughter. As time goes on and Pinocchio keeps limping, Mastiff decides to sacrifice him to sell his skin, but decides to do so by throwing the donkey to the bottom of the sea with a stone stuck in his neck. Thinking that this is the end for him, Pinocchio becomes quite agitated and starts making several sounds to try to warn him that he is human. But obviously Mastiff doesn't understand and orders one of his employees to throw the rock into the sea, taking the donkey along with him. But just as Pinocchio reaches the bottom of the ocean, a school of fish appears and starts swimming around him, turning him back into a wooden doll. Luckily for him, the fairy took pity and decided to save him one more time. As soon as he realizes that Pinocchio is a wooden doll, Mastiff immediately regrets having thrown him into the sea and orders his employees to take him back to show him off at the circus. But since none of them can swim, the trio is left just fighting while they watch Pinocchio swim away. But before he can even reach dry land, Pinocchio is swallowed by a colossal fish that looks more like a hellish megalodon. In the animal's stomach, Pinocchio finds an extremely bizarre tuna that has the face of a human and begins to talk to it. But during the dialogue, the boy notices a strange light in the background and decides to investigate to find out what it is all about. When he gets closer, Pinocchio discovers that that light is from Geppetto's lantern, who has also been swallowed by the giant fish and has almost built a house in there. After so many years, father and son finally meet again. But instead of returning to the town where they lived and subjecting themselves to extreme poverty again, Geppetto wants to stay inside the monster's stomach so he can feed on the fish it devours, but knowing that if he stays there any longer they will soon be digested, Pinocchio manages to convince his father to flee from there. They then take advantage of the moment when the fish is drowsy with its mouth open and crouch between the several rows of the animal's teeth. But since Geppetto can't swim, Pinocchio needs to serve as a support for his father to float. But since he is too small, he can't make the two of them float, and together they begin to drown. At this moment, that strange tuna appears once again and offers to carry them to the nearest beach, saving their lives. When they finally arrive on dry land, Pinocchio thanks the tuna for his help, says goodbye, and together with his father begins to walk aimlessly, until after several days of walking they finally find an abandoned house and decide to live in it. However, even though they have a roof over their heads, they still don't have a good source of food or water, and soon Geppetto begins to fall ill, forcing Pinocchio to walk to the nearest town where he meets a farmer and asks for some milk. But since he doesn't have the money to pay the amount the man charges for a bucket of milk, Pinocchio offers to spin the water wheel in exchange for the drink, and even with great difficulty he spends the whole day moving the wheel. In this way he gets the bucket of milk for Geppetto, but knowing that he will need more to take care of his father, the boy goes back to the farmer the next morning and gets a steady job helping the man every day in the farm for 10 silver coins. In this way, Pinocchio is able to buy what Geppetto needs to get better and go back to work. So now they no longer have to beg in order to support themselves, and besides, Pinocchio goes back to school. After another day of work, the wooden boy is returning home when he is spotted by that pair of bandits who were peeping at the farmer's lambs. Thinking to trick him once again, the fox, who is now missing one leg, tells the cat to hide and calls the boy over for a chat. As soon as he finds out that Pinocchio is now working and receiving a salary, the fox says that he has found out that the cat stole the coins and has stopped hanging out with him because of it. The fox intended to gain Pinocchio's trust and once again, convince him to bury the money in the field of miracles, but the blind cat eventually comes out of his hiding place and gives away the whole farce. Yes, after being fooled so many times, Pinocchio finally learns that they cannot be trusted and walks away with his money while the fox and the cat fight in the middle of the street. With this further proof that he has matured, the next morning while he is at work, Pinocchio is visited by the fairy who says she is proud that he has become a good boy and hugs him, making him faint in her arms and wake up a short time later already transformed into a real boy. So, what did you think of this movie? Let us know in the comments below. And if you liked the video, like it and subscribe for more movie recaps. See you next time.